Welcome to Soul Stories, where every story touches hearts, inspires minds, and leaves a message that stays with you forever. Real emotions, real lessons, real stories. This is Soul Stories. Ethan Rahil sat alone on a quiet park bench, a place he had not visited in years. The cool evening breeze brushed against his suit jacket, but he barely felt it. His thoughts were louder than the wind, heavier than the silence that surrounded him. For a man known across the city as a symbol of power, precision, and unshakable confidence, this moment felt painfully unfamiliar. Ethan had built his empire from the ground up. Colleagues admired him, competitors feared him, and employees whispered his name with awe, but none of them knew the cost behind his success. For years, he had traded birthdays for board meetings, friendships for financial charts, and peace for power. Work had become his language, his shield, and eventually his identity. And then today happened. A multi-year deal, the largest of his career, had collapsed without warning. An unexpected market shift, investors pulling out, legal complications he hadn't seen coming. Everything he had invested into the project, time, energy, trust, crumbled within hours. His corporation would survive. Ethan always had a backup plan, but something inside him didn't. He felt defeated, not by the failure itself, but by how deeply it shook the foundations he had convinced himself were unbreakable. As the sun dipped behind distant buildings, the shadows lengthened across the park. Families laughed nearby, children chased one another, and couples shared quiet conversations. It all felt like a world he no longer belonged to. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and lowered his face into his hands. His fingers trembled, not from fear, but from a realization he had avoided for too long. He had no one to talk to. There was no friend he could call without feeling judged or pitied. No family member waiting to check on him. No partner who would sit beside him and remind him that failure didn't define him. He had lived life like a race, outrunning loneliness without ever acknowledging how close it stayed behind him. And today it finally caught up. His chest tightened as the weight of loneliness pressed down on him. For years, he had believed that strength meant never showing vulnerability. Never slowing down, never letting anyone see the cracks in his armor. But here he was, in the middle of a park filled with strangers, feeling more fragile than he ever had in the privacy of his glass office. For the first time in years, Ethan Rahil, CEO, billionaire, industry giant, felt truly, undeniably alone. Ethan didn't notice the small footsteps approaching him, not until a shadow blocked the sunlight on his shoes. When he finally lifted his head, he found a little boy standing right in front of him. The child couldn't have been more than 7 years old. His cheeks were flushed from running, and in his tiny hand he held a half-eaten ice cream cone dripping down his fingers. The boy tilted his head, studying Ethan with an innocence that felt almost too honest. "Mister, are you crying?" he asked softly, his voice gentle, not mocking or rude, simply curious, like he truly wanted to understand. Startled, Ethan straightened, wiping his eyes quickly with the back of his hand. No, I'm fine," he said, trying to sound firm, steady, in control. The same tone he used in boardrooms, but with his voice cracking and his eyes slightly red, the words felt empty. The boy didn't believe him for a second. He shook his head in a matter-of-fact way, as though correcting a friend who said something silly. "My mom says it's okay to cry," he replied. "When I cry, she hugs me." He took a lick of his melting ice cream, then added casually, as if offering the most normal suggestion in the world. "You can borrow my mom if you want." Ethan froze. A stranger's child was offering him comfort, simple, pure, without hesitation. It was something no adult in his life had ever done. Adults analyzed, judged, calculated, but this little boy simply cared. For a moment, Ethan didn't know what to say. His chest tightened, but this time not with sadness, rather with a strange mix of surprise and warmth. He stared at the boy, wondering how someone so small could understand something so big. Why would you offer me that?" Ethan finally asked. The boy shrugged. "Because you look like you need a hug, and Mom says everyone needs hugs sometimes, even grown-ups, even bossy people." He paused. "Are you bossy?" Despite the heaviness in his heart, Ethan let out a short, soft laugh, the first real sound of relief he had made all day. "Yeah," he admitted quietly, "I guess I am." The boy nodded proudly as if he had solved a puzzle. "Then you definitely need a hug. Mom gives the best ones." The sincerity in the child's eyes struck Ethan harder than any business setback ever had. There was no agenda, no hidden intention, just kindness, pure and unfiltered, coming from a boy who barely understood the world but somehow understood him in this moment. Ethan looked at him, truly looked, and felt something shift. This little boy had seen through the armor he had spent years building, and instead of running away, he reached out with compassion. For the first time that day, Ethan felt the faintest spark of comfort.
We need to talk about this now. It's important for all of us.
Before Ethan could respond to the little boy's innocent offer, a woman hurried toward them, slightly out of breath. Her hair was tied back loosely, and she carried the look of someone juggling too many responsibilities at once. Still, her eyes were sharp, protective, worried. "Leo," she called, placing a hand on her son's shoulder. "You can't just talk to strangers like that." The boy looked up at her with wide eyes. "But Mom," he was sad. She sighed, ready to scold him again, but then she glanced at Ethan. In that brief moment, she took in the faint redness around his eyes, the forced stillness in his posture, the tension in his jaw. Her expression shifted instantly, less stern, more understanding. "Oh," she murmured, her tone softening. "I'm sorry, he just likes helping people who look sad." Ethan tried to offer reassurance, though his voice wavered slightly. "Your son is very kind, more kind than most adults I know." Leo beamed proudly at the compliment, leaning against his mother's side. The woman hesitated for a moment, studying Ethan the way someone studies a fragile object, carefully, respectfully, without intrusion. She gestured toward the empty space on the bench. "May I?" she asked. Ethan nodded. She sat down, keeping Leo close but allowing Ethan enough distance to feel safe. The park around them continued its lively rhythm, children playing, birds fluttering between branches, distant traffic humming, but on that bench, time seemed to slow. "If you need someone to talk to," she said gently, "sometimes it helps. You don't have to share if you don't want to, but I'm here." Her voice carried no pressure, no expectation, just simple human compassion. For reasons Ethan couldn't explain, even to himself, he felt the walls he had built for years start to loosen. He had never been someone who talked about emotions, not even in the privacy of his own home. But something about her steady presence, her calm eyes, and Leo's earlier innocence made him feel safe enough to speak. So he did. Slowly at first, then more openly, Ethan talked about the deal that collapsed, the crushing pressure of always being perfect, the loneliness he hid behind wealth and power. He wasn't dramatic, and she didn't interrupt. She listened, truly listened, as if his words weren't a burden but something she genuinely wanted to understand. When he finished, she took a careful breath. "That sounds incredibly difficult," she said, "but losing one deal doesn't mean you've lost yourself, and you don't have to carry everything alone, even if you're used to it." Her words weren't grand or poetic. They were grounded, steady, real, exactly what he needed. And in that quiet moment, Ethan realized something simple but profound. For the first time in many years, someone was not just hearing him. They were understanding him. The sky had shifted into shades of gold and soft pink, the kind that signaled the day was preparing to rest. Families were beginning to pack up their picnics, joggers slowed their pace, and the hum of evening life filled the park. Ethan hadn't realized how much time had passed while he spoke with the woman and her son. For the first time in a long while, he hadn't been checking his watch, his phone, or his calendar. He had simply been present. Leo leaned against his mother's side, his ice cream long finished, his small fingers now sticky but relaxed. As the woman stood up, brushing off the back of her jeans, Leo stepped toward Ethan and gave a gentle tug on his suit sleeve. "Mister," the boy asked, looking up at him with bright, earnest eyes, "are you okay now?" It was such a simple question, asked with such genuine concern, that Ethan felt something inside him shift again. This time it wasn't pain or pressure, it was gratitude. He let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding and smiled, a real smile, the kind that softened his entire face and melted the stiffness from his posture. "Yes," he said quietly, "thanks to you and your mom." The woman watched the exchange, her expression warm but calm. Ethan reached into his pocket, pulled out a sleek business card, and held it out to her, not with the force of a CEO making an offer, but with the sincerity of a person offering support. "If you ever need anything, work, help, support, please call me," he said. "I owe you both more than you know." She accepted the card not with awe or surprise, but with a gentle nod of acknowledgement. She wasn't intimidated by his status. She wasn't impressed by the embossed gold lettering on the card. She simply understood that gratitude came in many forms. "We're here most evenings," she said softly. "If you ever feel lost again, this park is where we walk." There was no pressure in her voice, no expectation. It was simply an invitation, a reminder that he didn't have to disappear back into loneliness. Leo grabbed his mother's hand, already pulling her toward the path, but before turning away, he looked back at Ethan and waved enthusiastically. "Bye, mister, don't forget." Ethan chuckled, nodding, "I won't." As mother and son walked away hand in hand, Ethan remained seated for a moment longer. The park lights flickered on, casting soft glows across the grass. The wind brushed through the trees, carrying the laughter of distant children. And somewhere deep inside him, warmth began to unfurl. It wasn't the thrill of a business victory, nor the pride of a financial success. It was quieter, gentler, something he had almost forgotten existed. Hope. Hope that failures didn't define him. Hope that kindness still existed in unexpected places. Hope that maybe he didn't have to face life alone anymore. And for the first time in years, that hope felt real.